Welcome to the webinar, Benchmarking Soil Health in Texas. My name is Greg Bohr, and I'm Director of Natural Capital at the Walmart Foundation, which is a philanthropic 501c3 foundation attached to Walmart, the big company that I'm sure you all are aware of. My specific role is to support regenerative agriculture adoption by farmers and ranchers here in the United States. And we do that across a wide variety of different landscapes, a lot of different ecosystems, a lot of production areas. But for the purposes of this, we're very much interested in cotton and the interplay between production resiliency in cotton and soil health. So I'm happy to be here to introduce this session to get you started on your way with the actual experts in the room that you'll hear about in just a minute. But this is very important to Walmart. We obviously are very embedded in the agricultural system, both as a retailer of grocery items, but also as a retailer of a lot of apparel items and home products that use cotton. And we're proud to use a fair percentage of US cotton. And with that, we want to make sure that we're supporting farmers and ranchers in these systems in adopting practices that will lead to resilience in more uncertain weather, markets, and everything else that a farmer has to face. So happy to be here. For those of you who are less familiar with the Soil Health Institute, that's a 501c3 nonprofit organization as well. And it's got a mission to safeguard and enhance the vitality and productivity of soils through scientific research and advancement. And I have to say, they do a pretty darn good job, which is part of the reason we're happy to be a funder of this work. Today, SHI is going to be hosting the first of several webinars highlighting the benchmarking work that they're doing across multiple landscapes and ecosystems, starting with three key cotton growing regions here in Texas, the Northern Blackland Prairies, the Gulf Coast Prairie, and the Southern High Plains. I should note that this work is an extension and a outgrowth of the U.S. Regenerative Cotton Fund, which is an initiative led by Soil Health Initiative. This is the program that we're happy to support through Walmart Foundation grant making. And it's an initiative that's led by Soil Health Initiative along with others, including farmers, to empower cotton growers and their trusted advisors with the tools, the information, and the networks they need to successfully adopt regenerative soil health practices. During today's session, we're going to get to hear from SHI's Program Director and Research Soil Scientist, Dr. Diana Bagnall, along with guest panelists representing the three cotton growing regions in Texas. I don't know about you folks in the call, but I'm a huge soil health nerd, so I'm very excited to hear from those who are experts in this space, but more specifically experts in their specific locations and ecosystems and production. And I think we're all going to learn a lot. So other panelists that we've got here, Dr. Lindsay Slaughter, Associate Professor of Soil Microbiology and Biochemistry at Texas Tech. Tamara Daniels, Executive Director of the Association of Texas Soil and Water Conservation Districts, SWCDs being very close to my heart, my work, and a SHI technical specialist. And then Brian Koch, who's the Regional Watershed Coordinator for the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board, which sounds like a pretty cool job in and of itself. We're going to start with Diana. She's going to give us a brief history and overview of SHI's benchmarking approach, how that functions, how it helps farmers set locally relevant goals for improving soil health. She's also going to highlight the key results for each region because they are all very different and they all have different results in how soil health practices affect outcomes for soil. And she's going to set the stage for our panelists. Couple housekeeping things, just real quick. Today's webinar is being recorded for those who can't be here today, and both the recording and those reports are going to be shared afterwards. So don't worry, all the soil health information that you could possibly want is at your fingertips, both in the, I think, forthcoming email, but also at the SHI website, which if you are a soil health nerd is like a Disneyland. Please type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Upload those that you'd like to have answered so that we can get a sense of like the group and what's most relevant to them. And we'll get to as many as possible during the open Q&A. So with that, I'm going to hand it over and get you all started.
Thank you so much, Greg. We really appreciate that intro. And we'll be moving along here with our program as we look at benchmarking soil health in Texas. There's a lot to learn, and there's also a lot of folks to thank. I want to thank Greg and the Walmart Foundation for being a supporter of the U.S. Regenerative Cotton Fund, and all of the other supporters of the U.S. Regenerative Cotton Fund, too, for making this work possible. A huge thanks to the farmers, the real farmers in real working situations who allowed us to sample soils, and to the folks who actually went out and sampled those soils. Back starting in 2021, we had folks in the field taking really high quality soil health measurements so we can bring the data to you today, and that work is certainly appreciated. We're talking about soil health today, of course, as we've already said a few times. So it's good to start with the definition. And we know that soil health is the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And this definition comes from USDA NRCS. And they've also given us these principles of minimizing disturbance, maximizing living roots, maximizing soil cover, and maximizing biodiversity. Of course, what exactly this looks like in a particular place is going to be different depending upon the soils, the temperature, the rainfall, the crop rotations. But we want to strive not necessarily for particular practices, but towards these principles. That brings us to the objective of our work today, which is to inform growers with what they need to understand how healthy their region's soils can be. And we want to do that by comparing minimally disturbed reference sites, sites that really exemplify those principles we were just talking about, like having living roots in the ground and improving our biodiversity. So we use those as a local reference because they're on the same soils and they're in the same regions. And then we compare them to row crops that are in what we'd call a baseline management, where they're kind of doing the practices that are predominant, and also the soil health practices that have been adopted on real farms in those places. And of course, exactly what this looks like is always going to be local. And that's why we've organized our soil sampling and our investigations around soil health management into these regions that we see on this map. So for Texas, we're looking at about 1.6 million acres of cropland in the southern high plains, another 1.6 in the Gulf Coast, and in the middle, about 1.3 million acres of cropland in the Northern Blackland Prairies. And we've issued out the reports from our soil sampling in each of these places individually. Today, we'll look through them, catch some highlights, get to compare them a bit, and hopefully encourage you to take a look deeper and understand a little bit more about your region and what's close to home for you. So we've been talking about these different principles of soil health, and we've been talking about how important it is to be in a local place. But I want to say a few words about the things that our teams who were in the field actually measured on these farms. We have an essential suite of of soil health indicators, and we start with looking at organic carbon. And so we measure the soil organic carbon concentration on these farms, and this is very close to soil organic matter. The units are a little bit different, but we look to both of those to help us understand soil structure, microbial activity, and nutrient availability. Some folks are really interested in how much carbon stock our soils can store, and so we measured that as well when we were out and about. Another essential indicator is aggregate stability. This is so important because it tells us about the resistance of our soils to wind and water erosion, and those highly stable soils are going to improve our aeration and our water movement, which we can imagine is really important for our plants to grow. The third thing that we looked at is carbon mineralization potential. I know there's carbon showing up all over the place, but this is a little bit different than the organic carbon concentration. Here we're looking at the carbon dioxide that's released by microbes, and it gives us an idea of the work that they're doing to reflect the soil's capacity to cycle nutrients. Of course, that's really essential for crop growth too. And then lastly, we want to look at available water holding capacity, which is key for drought resilience. It's the amount of water that our soil can store for crop growth. Spoiler alert, there were several places that we weren't able to report available water holding capacity yet. It's still a very essential indicator, and we'll report it in at least one of our regions today, but hopefully in the next year, we've got it everywhere. Okay, I'll take a breath there. We kind of been moving quickly. We've talked about different principles. We've gotten the definition for soil health. We've looked at some specific regions. And we know that all of these things are important when we're asking how healthy can a particular soil be? The next slide is where I try to put those things together for us. So we have the same indicators that were on the last slide, and they're grouped in the middle. And then we have this scale where we look at them for different kinds of management practices, different groupings of management practices, organized from those that have least observation of the soil health principles on the left to the most observation of the soil health principles on the right. So that gold color we're going to use for our baseline soils, the blue color for our soil health management, and then the green color for our reference sites that are kind of for a specific soil with the same clay content and pH and temperature and rainfall. We want to use this system to kind of contextualize. And you can see that represented by the soil on the left after a big rainfall. This is the soil that these actual data on the screen are drawn from. We've got a boot sinking into it. We imagine infiltration's not good and trafficability is not good, and it's just going to be a problem for us. And then on the right-hand side, showing how good it could look there, or kind of an upper limit for how good it could look, is a soil with a bunch of living roots, a soil that has some biodiversity, a soil that we were keeping the ground covered on. So we use this framework or this approach of benchmarking, but of course we have to apply it to real situations and not just to research plots. And so we've done this by looking at real farms in each of the regions that we're going to be talking about today. So here we're in the Texas Southern High Plains, and we've got a little cheat up in the right-hand corner. If you're not sure what region we're talking about, we've got them highlighted on the map of Texas in that upper right-hand corner. So for this area, we were looking at baseline soils, baseline fields that had irrigated continuous cotton and cotton wheat rotations. And they weren't using cover crops for that baseline soils, and they were mostly doing disc tillage. So you see a picture of what that looked like here. Some of the growers in that region, however, were using soil health practices, and they were still in irrigated continuous cotton and cotton wheat rotations. But this time they were using no tillage and annual cover crops for at least 4 years. So it's the same rotation, the same irrigation regime, but now we're using no-till and cover crops. And then as our reference, we have unirrigated grazed pastures, unirrigated hayfields, and pivot corners. So even though in general we think of references as being as good as it can get in terms of soil health principles, it's important to note that in this case, there were a little bit of a handicap for those references because they were not irrigated. So we've got all of this information on these crops that we sampled, and let's go ahead and dive in to the numbers. And so what we did is we organized the soil health indicators that we measured into this kind of overwhelming table, but we're going to spend a little time on it here. On the left-hand side, you see these white boxes where we have the different soil health indicators, starting with organic carbon concentration. Then we have aggregate stability, carbon mineralization potential, organic carbon stock, and available water holding capacity. And we see each of those showing up. As we move across the table, you can see that there's actually 2 different soils kind of represented here as examples. So I've just highlighted a red box around one of those soils, and that's a clay loam soil that has about 24% clay. And so the first thing I want to call your attention to is that even in the same region that generally has the same rainfall and temperature, it's really important that we're comparing ourselves to similar soils. If I were to say my organic carbon concentration is 0.7, is that a good number or not? Well, if I'm here in the clay loam soil, that would not be a particularly good number because 0.7 is just a touch higher than the baseline, and it's not near as high as 0.76 in the soil health practices box. But if I were to go over to the sandy loam soil that's to my left, and I were to say I have a soil organic carbon concentration of 0.7, that would be quite good because it would be higher than the baseline, higher than the soil health practices, and pretty close to the reference. So where we are in the world matters, and what soil we are in also matters. But as we look at this sandy loam soil as an example, I want you to notice a pattern, which is that the baseline soils improve a little bit in most of their numbers as they go up to soil health practices, and then it gets a little higher again for references. And that is the pattern that we would expect. So just looking down here, organic carbon for this sandy loam soil goes from 0.48 to 0.54 to 0.73. So it's improving. Aggregate stability in the next row goes from 0.28 up to 0.29 for soil health practices, and then all the way to 0.6 for references. Similarly, carbon mineralization potential goes from 9 to 10 to 16, organic carbon stock 8 to 9 to 11, and available water holding capacity is 0.73, 0.74, and 0.77. Don't worry, I'm not going to read every single number out to you from all the tables that we'll see today, but I wanted us to see that those numbers went up, but you might be saying some of them didn't go up by a whole lot. For example, the aggregate stability going from 0.28 to 0.29, maybe that's not so impressive. So the next two slides I'm going to show are some statistics to compare whether or not the changes were statistically significant. And we're going to look at them first, the difference between those baseline soils and how good it could be if we were able to attain those reference values. So that kind of tells us what's the logical upper limit in this area. And that's really important because sometimes we might see estimates out there that are really not fair for our region. And this is a way to help us detect if an upper limit is reachable. And then the next thing we'll do is we'll look at the baseline compared to the soil health practices to see how the farmers who are already working in this region are improving their soil health. So let's start with looking at the baseline compared to reference. We see that there's a 51% improvement in organic carbon concentration in the references. There's even more room to improve aggregate stability. It can be up to 116% more when we look at the row crop baseline compared to those perennial references. For carbon mineralization potential, it's 88% different. Organic carbon stock's a little lower. It's 39% room to improve. So that'd be a good number to think that's about maybe the most carbon I could store there. And then the next one is available water holding capacity. And it's only about a 6% difference between the baseline row crop wells and the references. And this is really interesting to me because it tells me that these growers who are in such a dry region are really doing a pretty good job managing to the potential for what available water holding capacity can do. And that makes a lot of sense because this is a really dry region. Of course, there are other things we can do to increase our drought resilience other than just our available water holding capacity. We could be keeping residue on the surface that will help us reduce evaporation and improving that aggregate stability to help our infiltration. But these numbers can give us an idea of what good might look like in this region for these same soils. Let's look now at how the grower using no-till and cover crop saw a statistically significant increase in organic carbon concentration with a plus 13%. They didn't see a stability or in carbon mineralization potential. They did see a statistically significant increase in organic carbon stock. So I think that's really impressive to be gaining that much carbon in such a dry region to be operating in. And then they saw a 2% increase was statistically significant. And it's more impressive when you think back to our last slide that said that 6% was what's even really attainable. So I think this is just a fantastic number, and even though it can seem small because it's a third of the progress that these growers were able to make, and they've made it with reducing their tillage and incorporating cover crops into the program. So this is kind of the pattern that we're going to have as we look across those different regions. And this is a wrap for the Southern High Plains, and we're going to move now down a little bit in the state to the Northern Blackland Prairie. We get more rainfall here and our temperatures are different. And so we would expect to have different soils and different management practices. Here, our baseline fields are dryland cotton, corn, wheat rotations that are often having chisel and disc tillage, and they're cultivated in fall and spring. The soil health practices here look like the same rotation of dryland corn, wheat, cotton rotations, but these growers were using no-till or strip-till. And then our reference systems were grazed pastures and hay fields. So that's kind of a little bit of information on how the management practices changed. Let's go ahead and look at how the numbers were different. We have the same layout here in terms of having our indicators on the left. We've dropped available water holding capacity for some technical reasons, and we have organic carbon concentration, aggregate stability, carbon mineralization potential, and organic carbon stock. We have the same setup where our more clayey soil is on the right. And so that's where we see some big numbers for organic carbon in particular with that high clay soils. Note that on that right-hand side where it says 2.13, that's about the highest organic carbon concentration number we're going to see on the board here. And that's double what we were seeing for our highest clay soil when we were up in the southern high plains. So just bringing us back to that reality that it really matters where we are when we try to interpret what good looks like for one of these indicator values. So that's our high clay soil on the right. Over on the left, we have a less clayey soil, which is a clay loam. And we see the same pattern again, where our baseline numbers get a little higher as we go to soil health. And then as we go to our references, they get higher still. We'll go now to, rather than have me read the whole table to you, we'll go now to some of our statistics and compare what was changing here to what was changing in the last region that we were in when we were a little farther north. So first we want to look at that question of how good could it get? What's the difference between the baseline and the reference soils? Well, here they could see up to a 65% increase in organic carbon concentration. 81% for aggregate stability. So these are a little bit smaller kind of opportunities to improve than we saw in the southern high plains for those two values, but a really high number for carbon mineralization potential. Lots of room to do better when we look at our baseline soils here. And then organic carbon stocks could be up to plus 51%. So how were the growers using no-till and strip-till doing in the Northern Blackland Prairies? Well, they saw a positive and statistically significant increase in organic carbon concentration of 14%, which is great. They also saw statistically significant improvements in aggregate stability. Carbon mineralization potential was not statistically significant, but carbon stocks were. So this was a little different where we added aggregate stability as being statistically significant here in the Blackland Prairie when that wasn't what we saw in the Southern High Plains. So which indicators show up as having changed depends on a lot of things, and it's important to think about it really in a local context as well as in the same soils. That's a bit of a wrap there, and we're going to move south one more time to go to the Texas Gulf Prairies, where now we're in dryland cotton sorghum and cotton corn rotations. For the baseline fields, they were mostly using disc tillage, and for the soil health practices, they were using strip till and no-till. Note that we're not seeing any really adoption of cover crops in the soil health practices here. That was true also in the Blackland Prairie, but they were using cover crops up in the Southern High Plains. For our reference soils here, they're grazed rangelands, pastures, and hayfields. When we take these management practices and we look at their effects by going to our soil health indicators, we get the same setup as we've had before. And these numbers are maybe a little closer to what we saw in the Blackland Prairie. So on the right-hand side, another very high clay soil here. This is a clay, and we're seeing pretty big values, for example, in our carbon with about 2%. So again, very different from where we started in the Southern High Plains because we're getting a lot more rainfall in this region. And then our other lower clay soil is a loam soil with a 20% clay. And we get to see our pattern continue where all of these numbers go up when we go from a baseline soil to soil health practices and then up to a reference. To move through the same statistics that we have before, first looking at how do those baseline soils compare to the reference, what's the room to improve for those predominant practices, we see that we could be as much as 95% higher for organic carbon concentration, of 103% for aggregate stability, 148 for carbon mineralization potential, and up to 69% higher in the organic carbon stocks. This is something to take note of. I know a lot of folks are interested in where can we store the most carbon, and 69% in kind of available room to improve in organic carbon stocks is the highest number that we've seen today. So I think it's worth pointing out that this is a region with some opportunity in that sphere. But to look at what the growers here have been able to do so far, we see that for organic carbon concentration, that little asterisk tells me that even though there was an 11% increase, it wasn't statistically significant because there is so much room to improve here. And aggregate stability was also not statistically significant. Interestingly, though, we saw a positive increase in carbon mineralization potential, and it was statistically significant. This is the first of the 3 regions we've looked at where that's been true. So it's really important not to assume that just because an indicator was showing up as being improved by a practice in one place, that another place will see the same pattern, because it is also regional and soil specific. Organic carbon stocks were also not statistically significantly changed in this area. And we saw in the last slide, they do have a lot of room to improve. So I want to dig into some of the why with our panelists here in just a moment. But first, I'll just summarize by saying that these 3 reports helped us to understand how healthy soils can be in the Southern High Plains, the Northern Blackland Prairie, and the Gulf Coast Prairies of Texas. Every region is unique, but it's really impressive to me that using practices like reducing tillage and adding annual cover crops, growers have already seen at least one soil health indicator improve in each of these regions in Texas. And there is a lot of room to improve for other growers who want to adopt these practices. If you're someone who wants to learn more about adopting these practices, I'd love for you to visit us at soilhealthinstitute.org. If you're specifically interested in some of the work you're seeing today, you can Google U.S. Regenerative Cotton Fund, and that'll take you to a spot where you can see the reports in our resources, but you can also look for local economic information and for information about how you might begin these practices. And you can search by location so you can find the material that's relevant to you. My favorite part is, though, being able to look up a soil health educator or a local technical specialist or farmer mentor who can help you on that journey. So with that, I'm going to thank you for your time, and we'll go ahead and bring in our panel. I'll stop sharing my screen. And as we all get together here, we'll be looking at some great questions. So welcome, Lindsay. It's great to see you, and Tamara. Good to see you as well. Always like to have the professionals here. And Brian, good to see you again too. So when I think about our questions, the first place I want to go, we ended there, Brian, on the Gulf Coast. And back when I was there in 2021, and when we were sampling, we didn't see a lot of cover crops, and we might have seen that creep into the data. Is that still true, or what do things look like on the ground now?
Yeah, you're seeing a slow adoption of cover crops. It is happening. I've seen some, and then I'm hearing of some, but a lot of them are experimenting with a lot of the conservation tillage and just reducing, even conventional tillage. That's where you're seeing a lot of the drivers. But as far as that goes, I think, there's just a lot of people curious about cover crops, and they're like, hey, maybe there's something here. I'm even seeing people leave, whatever residue or regrowth from a previous like corn crop, and just leaving it until it goes to reproductive stage, and then killing it, and just kind of leaving it in the field. So there's a small step, a small, I guess, move toward, just less tillage and less trips across the field. So I think that's a positive, but I think the cover crops are a little slower, but there are more. There are more. So yes.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. It sounds like we need to go back and take some more measurements one of these days. Tamara, I want to follow up with you. From your perspective, is this also a challenge in terms of the cover crops that we see in the Northern Blackland Prairie?
Yeah, so we just completed a project that we're very excited about and spent the last spring, early summer actually on the ground with producers, interviewing them, talking to them, from producers that have been on, they're long into their soil health journey to new, and finding some very similar things with struggling either to get the cover crops up and going. And it's one of those when they see that their neighbor is not having a success or is struggling with it, but that adoption of particularly the tillage, interviewing producers that are, they've got some of their ground that is completely no-till. And they've gone to a complete no-till, some variations on that depending on what their specific system needs. At a minimum, they're going a minimum till. But even talking to, their neighbors are like, aren't you going to plow that field? Well, why don't you try not? And that slowly it's, each growing season, it's one less pass of the plow, and of, their neighbors coming back and going, hey, that actually worked. And so it's this adoption. I hate to say it, but one neighbor at a time, and it just kind of is growing and spreading that way. But more focused, or I guess a quicker adoption maybe is the way to put it, on some of the tillage practices. But we're still hearing from producers on the ground that they are struggling more on the cover crop side. Yes.
Thanks for that. And so kind of going up north, Lindsay, to you, what are some of the soil health practices that you see working, for you guys?
Yeah, so the best practices for where we are with the challenges we face with extreme heat and drought and really high winds, things that directly protect the soil from that heat and that kind of hold that soil down in place are really what's going to do best for here. So keeping it covered either with a cover crop or at least with pretty aggressive residue management, especially stuff that adds some verticality to that system to kind of catch anything that's kind of coming across the field, any snow you get, any rainfall that would be coming in, not letting that kind of move outside your system, and to physically buffer it against that wind and that high heat that you get. That's going to be helpful in the region. And one thing I've noticed is that the soils here really like to rest. So if you include something like in a rotation that has some low intensity phase, whether that's having some type of covered fallow, or if you put it in grass with or without livestock, that to me has been one of the most effective things to use in this region, in addition to stuff like cover crops and adopting no tillage practices.
Awesome. So there's a lot of different things to think about there, but it sounds like there's some common threads in what's working. Brian, maybe going back to you, we touched on this a bit. Growers they're starting out, they're learning something new. What challenges do you see them facing, and do you have some tips or some things that you're seeing work for folks as they're going through those early years?
So I think just as far as what's holding people back, I think there's a lot of fear of the unknown. And then you have a market that's really not there. Cotton prices are not great, corn prices are not great, and trying to, maintain some income and keep going. I think that's probably the biggest. But another thing is, going into something new and trying that. But also, in a lot of the area I work in, there's a lot of land that's leased. And when a landlord or landowner sees something different, like, hey, what's going on here? And it is highly, highly competitive between the farmers to get that leased land. And as soon as they see something different, they're calling that landowner, hey, what's going on here? Are they not farming? Why are they doing this? All these questions come up. And I think a solution to that is maybe, some of these farmers that are interested is to go talk to the landowners, because I've seen where they have talked to the landowners and kind of explain what they're trying to do, and they're just going to say, hey, this is going to look different. This is, this might not be what you're used to, but this is what I'm going to try. a lot of them, so, they have the success of having them being open to that. So there is that. I think communication but really any field you work in, communication is key on that. But yeah, I think the main things are the markets, the fear of the unknown, and then that leased land and those challenges.
Yeah, so it sounds like I love that piece on communication, like talking a little bit ahead of time about this is what we can expect. It's going to be a little different, but we'll kind of learn together. Tamara, how about you? Are there some like tips for getting started or some things that for those people who are being successful, maybe with some practices not everybody's trying, what's working for them to make it happen?
So that was absolutely, that was one of the questions that we asked as we met with producers again, was specifically, what advice would you give somebody that's looking to make this transition? A lot of them, you need to go meet with your local NRCS, to get the technical assistance, whether it's come to me, find the producers in your area, that was what was so wonderful. Everyone that we interviewed, that we talked to, was like, yes, I want to talk about what we're doing, the great things that we are doing, and the willingness to share, their success stories, as well as the things that did not work so well for them. So whether it's, like I said, finding another producer in the area, so going to NRCS, and then Brian touched on something that several of them also was, it is scary. It is very scary. And one of them was, his quote was, "You just got to go for it," which I thought was great. The way he's like, but another one was a little more circumspect of, there's potential you have X number of crops in the time that you're a producer, and how one mistake can impact some things like that, but that all of them were stay the course. There's ups and downs. Find the experts, find the neighbors, get the advice, ask your questions, go in with your eyes open, asking all of the, like I said, getting all of the information, that there's lots of people out there willing to help and share. And really, I guess, that assurance that we guarantee you there's no stupid question. Nobody's gonna, laugh at you or anything like that. And as like I said, as one of them put it, you just got to go for it.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's awesome. Lindsay, when you're looking and working with these folks as a technical specialist, and in your day job as a professor, what are some things that you see working for people?
Yeah, I want to highlight and really support what Tamara and Brian were just talking about, which is building a support network for yourself. I heard one person describe it as make sure, like, put together a personal advisory board for you as you're kind of getting started, and whether that's someone from industry, from your neighbor, from your commodity board, things like that. Like, get a group of people that you trust, and join a community that can kind of serve as an advisory board for yourself getting started. So that I would say is a really important part of it, as well as just kind of trying not to get too bogged down in how much information there is out there, because it can be pretty overwhelming sometimes, the variety of practices and the variety of combinations and amendments, and like all these different combinations of strategies that people can use, and that can be pretty intimidating. So trying to keep things simple and listen to and kind of recruit advice from the people around you can really help someone stay the course.
I love that. I think, that's something that we always want to think about is, how do we get the help we need? And that's certainly been a big part of why we think having technical specialists like y'all on the call, and having those local farmers who, they've been there and they've walked that. And one thing I hear them say, is hey, start small, like take a little plot, Brian, I know you and I've talked about that. Like, don't go change the whole thing all at once, and maybe not in the front field, like, figure out something that works for you. So that I love that.
Yeah, I think the taking the small bites at a time and just kind of tasting it. It's like, okay, do I like this? Does my field like this? Does my yields like that? And recently we did a field day workshop in one of the coastal counties, and one of the producers that was there, that was on our field, he said, yeah, we started with these small plots. We didn't go all in, but now he's incorporating on all of his land, and it's a lot of land. So, it's nice to see. And I think another thing I would encourage producers to do is seek out people who are doing it and talk to them, because they are, in my experience, they are open books and they are glad to share what they're doing. They're, because I think there's some pride in it, and they feel like, hey, I want everybody to be successful, and there is success and
I
that
love
they're
that.
seeing. So,
That's great. Well, we've got some really cool questions coming in from the chat. Some of them might be a little nerdy, so I'm going to try not to nerd out too much on any of them. Let's see. The first one was about an area that I've worked in some, talking about available water holding capacity, saying, hey, a lot of times we speak in inches of water. Kind of hard to know, like, is a 2% increase in water holding capacity, what volume would that be? Well, the reason that's tricky is because all of our different soil types hold different amounts of water to begin with, so it would kind of depend. But I would say, at the danger of throwing out some numbers, I've seen maybe a tenth of an inch or so sometimes of available water holding capacity increase. And the thing about it we got to remember is that it's not about one rainfall event. I say available water holding capacity is not a cup of water, it's a cup for water. It's this extra little space we get, and every time it rains, we get to get it again and we get to refill it. And so I think that's one of the reasons that whenever we can keep that up and keep our drought resilience high. I thought that was so cool, those numbers in the high plains of how close growers were. Lindsay, did you expect to see that, or what did you think of that?
No, I thought that was great, especially because like water is one of the main limiting factors in this region. So I think it really trying to incorporate those strategies that just physically traps that water down in there, as well as trying to build back up their soil structure, and create more nooks and crannies for water to hide out, in the between sessions. I think that was really encouraging to me.
Yeah. Place like Texas, we care about water a whole lot. Someone asked how many years of practice adoption were needed for a field to be categorized as soil health management. So we were looking for folks who had adopted for 5 years or longer. That's what we were hoping for. But as you saw today, there wasn't a standard definition. It was really a comparison of, hey, most folks are doing these kinds of things, and here's some folks who are doing some new things. So what was really innovative in the Blackland Prairie was different than what was really innovative in the Southern High Plains. And we know that can be, we really struggled as we thought about how to present that, like, can we be more clear? But when it comes down to it, regenerative agriculture is local, and these growers are facing really different challenges and temperatures and rainfalls in all these places and soil types. And so, but in general, we wanted to see 5 years or so of adoption of a practice to kind of give them a chance to build it up. We know sometimes maybe year one, it's going to be a little tough. Let's see what else. This is one that maybe Lindsay, I'll get your take on it. It's a hard question, so I'll see how you do, and then I'll help if I can. I've heard a lot about the importance of microbes in healthy soil, for how some of the measurements made in this study is measuring biology in the soil a useful metric. Kind of a tough question.
I mean, the short answer is yes. Uh, but the slightly more contextualized answer is yes, as part of the suite of physical and chemical context for what the microbes are able to achieve, right? We have this Venn diagram that we like to draw people and say that the soil health is the intersection of optimizing your physical, chemical, and biological capacity and properties of your soil. So, we need to focus a lot on fixing the physical habitat, the physical and chemical habitat for the microbes. So if your structural quality is terrible, if you have some type of contaminant in your soil, or you have salinity issues or nutrient deficiencies, all of those things are going to be probably the most limiting factor in terms of soil health. But in addition to that, it's the microbes that are helping to facilitate a lot of the actual nutrient transformations in your soil and what's going to be made plant available for your cash crops and things like that. So yes, biology is a very useful metric within the context of that physical and chemical habitat that the microbes would be living and working within, if that makes sense.
I love that. And I think, we looked at carbon mineralization potential today. It tells us a little bit of that, not maybe about who is showing up, but like how much work is getting done. And I'm a soil physicist, I'm biased, but I love the fact that aggregate stability, I mean, that's the habitat you're talking about. And we need those microbes to help us get that good aggregate stability.
Yeah.
Tamara, I'm just curious, you just mentioned wrapping up a project where you're interviewing a bunch of growers. What were they saying about the soil biology?
So actually one of them, that's what interesting, I thought it was fantastic. He actually whipped out his iPad standing there in the turn row and had 20 years, well, I say not exactly, but roughly 20 years of his soil testing and of this is where I started out and this is what you can see when I adopted, moved into the no-till, this kind of thing, and this is where I am today. And of just watching his organic matter, just as something as simple as that, and how that has, kind of it's creeped its way up, I guess you would say, over since they started their soil health journey, if you will. And that was absolutely fascinating. Another producer, Lindsay, I don't want to jump out into your area, but there was one out there. He's making his own biologics and liquefying them and running them back into his own system through his pivots. I mean, he's applying his own biologic that he's creating from his own crops in his own, system, a completely kind of closed system, and putting them back into. So, there's a lot of technology, a lot of testing, a lot of, the science behind it that they really are diving into. I think it's fantastic. And
Yes.
like I said, they're looking at the numbers and generating the data and are like I said, absolutely very excited to share it. And it was like I said, it was great. He's like, well, here, let me get my iPad and I'm going to show you. And he just starts flipping through of going back to the early 2000s of his soil tests.
That's so cool. I love that these growers are interested in the numbers and that they're trying things and that they're seeing what works. And so, yeah, I think that all of that is super exciting, and it just shows the fact that it's showing up, right? That these numbers are in real farm fields, and we're seeing these indicators that we've measured go up in all of the regions. I'm super thrilled with that. Let's see. Going back to some of our other questions. So this one was a question. And a great question. Has any analysis been done or planned to look at the impact of crop yield? That is a great question. Of course, it's something we all care a lot about. There's a study that it's not finished yet, it's in the works, but I think it's okay to say in general that what we're seeing is when we just kind of do practices for soil health, and we kind of go, well, I want to check the box that I grew cover crops. I'm going to throw some cover crop seed out there. Maybe we don't see much of a benefit to our yield, but it's these soil functions of getting better nutrient cycling, getting better aeration, getting better water capture. Those are the things that are having the yield benefits. So there is some work planned. We did not include it in this study. And those were, again, real farm fields. We didn't ask growers to report their yield to us, and that they kept that themselves. But it makes me think, Brian, of when you and I were talking about some of the stuff that you've seen, just thinking about infiltration and how that's changed. And of course, that's a really direct link to yield. Do you want to talk about some of those infiltration experiments?
Sure, yeah. So we, like I said, recently did this field day, and both of the farmers have been adopting the practices really seriously for about 3 years. So 2022 is when they start, they pretty much cut out the tillage and went into it. And one of the farms, he was using biologicals and cover crops and strip till, and his infiltration rate. These were on clay soils, coastal clay soils, which have a bad reputation for no infiltration or low infiltration. And we infiltrated 2 inches in 10 minutes. And then we went to the next field, which was a very similar soil type. He was grazing the cover crops, not at the time, but he started incorporating livestock into the system, and his infiltration was 3 inches in less than 6 minutes. So, and this is, 3 years in, and our big challenge on the coast is we burn through that organic matter. I mean, you put it down, and on my little bitty operation, I experiment with cover crops and stuff, and the biggest challenge is keeping the ground covered. And because the biological action is just so fast. But I think that leads to faster recovery, and that's why I think that's one reason why these infiltration rates improve so quickly. And that's key because we're getting, it seems like we're in a pattern where we're getting a lot of rain in certain times of the year where we used to not, and then where we're used to getting rain, we're not getting it. So it's keeping that water in place, and um, even in related to the yields, um, some of the ground, and this is one of the producers, his family, farms the same, same kind of land right next to him and stuff. He claims that, that they claim that they have better soil than he does and everything, but he's catching up on the yields. He's catching up to their yields. And so I think that those practices and all those other indicators that we're looking at are improving, and that's why he's catching up. And he's not, he's like, I'm just doing this because this is the right thing, and he's seeing that improvement, and other people are noticing, and hopefully will start adopting. So that's how
Yeah.
it's working.
Oh, I love that. And I think it's so interesting hearing you talk about the challenge of building carbon, but it was the carbon mineralization potential that was statistically significantly improved in that region. So even in that carbon, you may think, oh gosh, it's going away. Well, it's doing work for you,
Mhm.
and it's not just vanishing, it's really helping you out, and it's in that living biomass. That's so cool. Let's see, I mean, we're gonna get close to time here. I want to sneak in a couple more questions, so I might kind of stick some together. One person asked if we were really seeing impacts of herbicides and pesticides, and another person asked, had mentioned that we've done some other analysis where we looked at the impacts on net farm income. And so I think, to me, those connect, because while the growers who we talked about today, we did not go out and look at receipts and ask them to tell us what their herbicide and pesticides inputs were when we did this study. We have seen, in talking to other growers, that when they're looking for profitability and they're looking to see their inputs go down, they look to soil health practices as some ways to not put so much out, and to reduce in anything we can in terms of those inputs. Is that something, Lindsay, that you've also seen growers in the High Plains talking about, or maybe not so much?
Yeah, definitely. This managing all those trade-offs is a big theme, and that's kind of what farming is, and what ecology is basically just a set of managing trade-offs and optimizing those trade-offs, whether that's in your inputs, whether that's in your different costs and benefits and things like that. But I know one thing I kind of wanted to touch on with that herbicide pesticide question is, we don't have to dig into it too deep because I know we're kind of running out of time, but I think a lot about how tricky that can be as it represents a trade-off. Because in many times when you try to move to a no-till system, the reason they were tilling is to manage weeds. And so when you go to a no-till system, you may have to adapt your herbicide or pesticide, maybe more so your herbicide practices, in order to, because that's kind of your main weed management tool. And so the question there was more about what was the impact of herbicides and pesticides on soil biology and overall soil health. That's something that there are some facets of what's going on with, say, the microbes that maybe are impacted by the herbicides and pesticides. So, for example, pesticides impacting certain non-target groups of organisms and inhibiting those, herbicides perhaps affecting the microbes in terms of what types of plant residues are available to them, or different flushes of residues into the soil. But that is a really, really active area of research right now. So the jury is kind of still out on what necessarily those types of agrochemicals do to specific groups of soil biota, but it's something that we're looking at very closely.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear that you're doing that work. We know it's important, and whenever we can cut back a little bit and save a few dollars, we're certainly all game for that too. So we think that's really important. We're right at time. I want to thank you all so much, Lindsay and Tamara and Brian, for joining. I also want to thank Greg and the Walmart Foundation for giving us our intro today and for helping support this work. We look forward to continuing the conversation. So I had my email up today, and I'd love for you to reach out if you have more questions. We'll get those answered for you. Please also watch for a follow-up email with a survey so that we can learn how we did today. We'll have today's recording and then the copies of those regional reports too, so that you make sure to get that. Thank you again all so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.